in the grad school, assistant vice chancellor for postdocs, and director of the iJobs program. And I'm really honored today to have our guest speaker, Tom Coughlin, who is going to share with us his lessons from his book. And he's very passionate about helping people who have PhDs understand how to best take advantage of their expertise and apply it towards a productive work environment. So Tom received his bachelor's from the College of New Jersey and a PhD in bioengineering from the University of Notre Dame. He's written 12 research publications, including one for Nature Communications, and presented at 23 conferences internationally. He has worked in consulting, taught entrepreneurship as a professor at Stevens Institute of Technology, and published papers on the state of the biotechnology sector in New York. In addition, he has consulted for 4 startups and started his own business consulting company, which he is still doing. He's currently living in, are you still in
Jersey
City? Okay. And helps PhDs navigate the complicated paths from graduation to fulfilling a career. So we're going to really benefit today from his understanding and experiences and advice, and I hope that you will all engage actively, and welcome, Tom.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you for that warm introduction. It is a pleasure to be here, and especially in a department like yours where there's so much going on for postdocs. You guys are on the forefront in terms of what's happening for postdocs.
There's also grad students.
And grad students.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of a program, it's an honor to be in a program where and visiting you guys where PhDs are taken into consideration, and I think that's so important. So I'm really excited. It's a testament to have people like Jeanette looking for people like me or like anyone else that does this stuff to really seek that out. So really cool. And today, like Jeanette said, I'm going to be talking about how to make your PhD work, a guide for creating your career in science and engineering. We're going to keep it interactive, so please ask questions, raise your hands, yell stuff out if you feel so excited about something. Okay? So we're a small group, so I'm sure you guys know each other to some degree. So just feel free, and we'll get it to be a pretty warm environment. All right, so this cartoon says, I know you can't read it from back there, I'd show you the way, but this door's locks are different from when I went through it. So that's a professor, and that's a student. And this is something that I'm sure you're familiar with, but PhD professors and advisors for PhDs typically do not know the careers that are available to PhD students and postdocs. It's very common that once you go into academics as a professor, you're in the professor environment. What do you care about? You care about getting grants, you care about writing papers, advising students, teaching classes. A priority is not really seeing what else is out there in the world for PhDs. So who can show you this? So if he can't, then I'm sure someone else will. So you have to seek it out. So let me tell you a little bit about my background and how I got to be here today, and then we'll jump into all about PhDs, postdocs, academics, industry, and then how to be proactive in your PhD. So that's a lot of the contents of the book, but we're going to make it into an interactive environment. So I went to TCNJ. I'm from New Jersey. My dad is actually, I'm visiting my parents for this event, so my dad was able to come with me today, which is really cool. So I went to TCNJ and studied biomedical engineering. I then decided that I wanted to either be a professor, and then I also had worked at a company in Plainsboro, Integra Life Sciences, and I learned that I wanted to either work in pharma or work as a professor. In pharma, I realized that the people with PhDs were actually the ones that kind of controlled where the research was going. So they were the ones that actually made decisions, and they were looked to in meetings as people that were able to drive where the money was going and where the research interests were going. So I figured if I could throw a dart and hit one of those 2 jobs, I'd be pretty happy after my PhD. So during my PhD at the University of Notre Dame, I went there not for the football. I actually didn't know that they had football, and I was that kind of an engineer. And then so went there. I studied musculoskeletal biology. I studied the effect of exercise on bones, and also cancer metastasis to bone. I had a pretty, by all means, successful PhD. I was known at the end of it in my world of bone biology. I had done good presentations, good research. Journals were, impact factors of 4 or 5. I had 5 first author publications, and I even had a chance to study in Ireland in Galway, where I had gotten my own funding. So I thought, okay, I've demonstrated I can get my own funding. I'm starting to look pretty good on paper for that professor job. So at the end of my PhD, wrapping things up after 5 years, I applied to teaching professor jobs, research professor jobs, but I really wanted to be a research professor. I thought I had some new ideas, and I wanted to carve into that space. So I applied for postdocs. I applied to 4 postdocs. I visited Princeton. I had an online one with BU. I did Columbia as well as NYU and Rutgers, actually. And in all those interviews, I had one professor at Princeton who I interviewed with, and during that interview, the PhD student in the lab said, "Hey, can I take you for a coffee?" So I said, "Absolutely, sure, I'll go for a coffee with you." So she takes me and she's like, "You really shouldn't come to this lab." I said, "Well, all right, thanks. Best 5 minutes I've ever spent." She's like, I said, "Why though?" She's like, "Well, the professor always asks when people are going to that room. You can't leave the lab without knowing. You walk right past the door." And I was like, okay, those are the nightmare scenarios I've heard about. I've heard enough. So I left there, wound up meeting a professor at NYU who I'd met at conferences. He knew me because he was actually from Ireland. He was aware that I had gone to Ireland. So it was like a perfect match. I was like, wow, awesome, it's NYU. Never lived in the city before, so they were very attractive for many reasons. So I went in 2015 to 2017, I went to NYU Langone Medical Center in the orthopedic surgery department in a small lab on the 11th floor. And I had two master's students, a lab tech, and then an MD, and then another 2 bachelor students who were working with me. In about 6 months, I realized that the professor didn't have exactly the gumption or the direction that I thought we were headed in. He kept changing the research topic that I was focusing on within 6 months of the postdoc. And I'm looking at my budget, and I'm seeing this, $45,000 fellowship that I'm on with the NIH, and I'm like, I don't know how long I can do this with this professor changing topics before my explicit cost is just going to keep going up, and my return on this investment that I'm making in time and sacrifice of income. How much time would I actually do this? So I just I looked at that and I was like, okay, something's going wrong here. I started to meet with people outside of that. I was fortunate enough to be funded by an NIH award that was specific for postdocs to do research under, and it allowed me to have a little bit more leverage. So I had my own research funding, and I started to do some other stuff and forward ahead with trying to get a K-99 grant. And about 1 year into my postdoc, my postdoc advisor tells me that they did not get tenure. So they actually had just missed out on tenure. And I said, okay, it was hard. It was a hard conversation. Love the guy. Went back to Ireland last year for a friend's wedding. Had coffee and a beer with him. So still friends with him today. But he didn't succeed in our grants, and he had to leave. So he left NYU, and he's like, look, you can either come with me to Ireland, or you can stay and figure it out. And that's a whole other long story, but I decided to stay. And in staying, I switched labs, but kept my own research directions going, tried to wrap up what I was doing, and I thought if I just get one paper out of this, I'll at least have a good story to tell on applications. So I started that. I started writing my applications. I started having that story to tell with my research. And at the same time, a lot of my friends that I was making in my neighborhood and also in the city were like, look, like you need to find, like, kind of puts a little bit more eggs into other baskets besides academics. What if this doesn't work out? And I was kind of seeing other people do this, and really the icing on the cake for me was I met a professor who came and gave a talk about being a young tenure-track professor at NYU. And they said, yeah, you know, I just have a hard time sometimes with being a tenure-track professor. It's really hard. And she said she had 2 kids at home, and she said when she would get home from work, she barely had time to have dinner with them, and then after dinner, it was back to the laptop and back to work. And I thought, okay, that's what it's going to take, you know? And I'm not saying that to dissuade anyone. I think that's what it takes. We, professors are the, you know, MLB, the NFL, the Major League Hockey, they are the Messis of the world. I mean, like, they're the intensity of that motivation inside of academics, right? I mean, when you think about it, like, only a certain number of people make it to MLB, to the NFL. That's the type of dedication you need to get to that level. So, and one could argue it's even harder, right? Because you have to have a lot of luck. But, okay, so then I went and I started to pursue other careers outside of academics. And I started to find things that I actually didn't know was there. I don't know where you're at now, but for me, I didn't know how many careers were out there for PhDs. I was always against, slightly against business. I was a little bit of an idealist. And I kind of thought, you know, it's just not something I was totally invested into. But then finally, I realized that I had an entrepreneur mindset. I took biomedical entrepreneurship, and I realized that there was a field called medical communications, and I found marketing, and I found stuff that fit my interests as an extrovert as well as different things. So I started to explore this. I took many, many courses on it to get to know myself, as well as to get to know the field out there, and then find a career fit for me. So the book that I wrote is based on those experiences, as well as everything that I've experienced since then, and how I am able to create tailored content that actually match it so that you can find your career. Then there's a lot of like workshops inside the book. So I worked in medical communications and in pharma. I consult for startups and biotech companies. I have my own company called Core Merchants, and I'm an entrepreneur. I teach entrepreneurship at Stevens, and I also have this new idea that I've been exploring and applying for grants with outside that. And so after my postdoc, I landed my first job at BGB Group, which is a high-functioning medical communications agency in New York. I was in person for that time, and it was great to have that in-person experience, particularly with obviously what the future would hold. And in that experience, I worked with BMS, Takeda, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Takeda on some of the biggest immuno-oncology drugs, and we did marketing for them. And then we went through a layoff. We lost 20% of business in one day. BMS decided to switch their marketing campaigns, and they cut our funding, and the company had to cut 25% of the company because of that. So I got laid off. I was one of the last in, first out. And so a lot of other PhDs got laid off as well. It was the first time I'd ever even knew that was a thing. I didn't think that you could lay off a PhD. And neither did my parents. And so, I mean, truthfully, like, my parents worked in the government. So anything inside of industry is extremely foreign. So I looked to my friends, I gained a lot of advice, and a lot of them said, look, this is just what happens. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, get back in the race. And so I started this blog, PhDsource.com, which still exists today. I started putting out content blogs about how to navigate the PhD environment. And I created a PhD planner. I have 3 of those today. And then also a Udemy course. And then eventually during COVID, sat down and put it all together and tied a bow on it and talked to Wiley and got it published. And I'll raffle those off today at the end. But yeah, so that's my story. That's where I am at today. And You can ask me any question you'd like, personal or not, about the PhD, and I'm happy to answer. But let's start going through some of the interactive stuff. So you are here right now. And I know each of you are at different points. You know the point you're at. But you're here, right? So you're at this very instance. So at the start of your PhD, though, what career were you thinking about? What were you interested in doing?
I was interested in becoming a professor, a PI, but now
PI.
I want to go to industry.
But now industry, okay.
Okay.
Can I ask another? Did you know about industry when you started your PhD?
No.
Okay.
Like I knew the existence of possible work outside of academia, but when you say in academia during PhD, you're very much in contact with academia stuff, and you're like all about that. But then when you start going into and trying to understand what you can do after, then you realize there could be other paths that could be more of a match for you. Then
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of science behind that.
Right, exactly.
Changing your environment is a way to get new perspective. Okay, well, anyone else want to share what they were thinking before? What were you thinking?
I mean, I can share. I feel very similarly. I had a lot of professors and PIs that inspired me, like throughout my undergrad experiences, and so I really wanted to get a PhD. But I think since being a grad student, I've seen like just how much of a commitment and like how much of a stress load it can be, and I think it might not be for me, which is why I'm like really trying to just explore every option that's out there.
Cool. So exploring every option that's out there. Anyone going to stay with being a PI, or started that path and it's like, heck, high water, here we go. Yeah.
I'm only a first-year PhD student, but I'm more interested in academia because I like the idea of being able to be a mentor in the same kind of way that I thought mentors in academia.
Cool. Very cool. So that's one thing that I don't want to do is there's a guy out there, his name is Isaiah Hinkle, who wrote this new
Cheeky
book.
scientist. Everybody, you guys know Cheeky Scientist?
Yeah, and one thing he does
He's
is
very anti-academic.
he's very anti-academics, and that's not me. That's not my perspective. I actually find it to be a little bit unsettling to have someone be so strongly against academics. Because I think academics just needs this self-correction, and then it'll be sort of on its way. But anyone else? What else is? Yeah.
I started out wanting to be a research scientist in industry, and now I'm kind of exploring other options within industry, so not on the bench.
Cool. Yeah, maybe you know you're there.
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome. Anyone else?
I was just saying, in the start of my PhD also, I wanted to be a professor in academia and now also I want that, but I'm not so sure it's easy to get that anymore. So
Yeah.
I definitely want to develop interest in other things as a backup. I don't want to be like this or nothing else.
Is it still in India where if you're 35, you're phased out and you apply for?
It's a soft rule now. If you're over 35 and you're good enough, they take you anyway.
So in my book, I interviewed. There's the first three. There's 12 transition stories, and 3 of them, maybe more, or 4, are from people from India, and who came here. And they talk a lot about the visa issues. Talk a lot about the PhDs in India. Yeah, I learned a lot about that. It's very interesting. It's very different. Yeah, different, very different. I'm sure you know. All right, so everyone was thinking something, but it seems like the common denominator is everyone got more exposure to things as time went on. I think we can conclude that from this limited evidence that we have. So our PhD advisor could not tell me about PhD jobs, but he did tell me how he became a professor 10 years ago during a completely different job market and economic time. Hey, that's really helpful. My PhD advisor coached me how to become a professor when he entered the job market in 2001. He said funding rates were at 40%. They're not that anymore. So where are we now? So you are here. This is the landscape. This data is publicly available. I've incorporated it into my book. And PhDs are on the rise since 1958, when there were about 8,000 PhDs graduating every year. That number has risen to over 50,000. Science and engineering PhDs are about 40,000 currently every year. So over time, the number of PhDs have gone up. So okay, what has that done? Well, the NIH budget has actually increased as well, and it's gone from 10 billion to 40 billion. Now, the only thing when you read this chart that is a little bit deceiving is it doesn't account for inflation. If you actually average out and calculate into that a year-over-year inflation, the average increase is only 2 times. So it looks like 4 times, but if you're looking at compound interest inflation, it's actually only 2 times. So the cost of goods has gone up, so you have to take that into account. Okay, so then you look at the research project awards, and the success rate is on the y-axis on the right, and then the applications awards is on the left axis. So the number of applications has gone up. That's the white bars here, and then the gray is how many awards were given. So you can see the amount of awards given, they actually stay under 10,000 per year, and this is all NIH awards. So it includes R's, K's, and then some of the smaller sort of U grants as well. And then, so you can see that despite the fact that the grant money has increased, the success rate has actually gone down. And the axes on the horizontal axis is 1995 to 2022. So not only has the grant money not increased at a fast enough rate because there's more competition, but the success rate has actually gone down, and the competition has just gone up. I know I said that twice, but it's important. So with that, you would think that with more people becoming PhDs, that it might have been because of a need, right? Like perhaps the supply of the available positions and professors, predicated the fact that there needed to be more PhDs. But unfortunately, that was actually not the case. And the amount of PhDs available, or professors' jobs available every year, is approximately 3,000. And then I tested this. The paper that I referenced for this was published in 2008. And there was 3,000 professors available in science and engineering. And then I tested this in Indeed, and I did a search over when the job market actually opens, and I found that there was between approximately 3,000 to 5,000 jobs. So you can it averages it out to about 3,000 to 4,000 professors available. So this representation here is just showing in 2000 compared to 2021, if only PhDs that graduated in that year applied to those 3,000 jobs, how many of them would get jobs as professors? So it's 11% in 2021 and 7.5%, sorry, 11% in 2001 and 7.5% in 2021. And that does not include the people paying their own postdocs who are becoming more specialized and more skilled and getting more training, who are also applying for those jobs too. So, take it for what it's worth. If you have the skills, you have the credentials, and you put in the work, you'll get there. But it's challenging. Yes.
Why the position are diminishing?
Why is
the reason of why the posting are diminishing?
So the postings are largely staying the same because the number.
So 3 plus always 3.
Yeah.
So what is the difference?
The difference is that the amount of PhDs has gone up.
Okay,
so the availability of professor jobs is not kept up with the demand.
I mean, we don't need to know this, but also faculty don't retire, right?
So a lot of people say that the baby boom, like I don't know if you've heard this, but people think that there is a change coming where everyone will retire. There'll be like a couple of years, but we're also seeing universities shift to different models of teaching. So you know, the economy is completely changing. All right, let's keep moving. Where are PhDs getting jobs after their degrees? Where do you hear of your peers getting jobs?
Random pharma.
Random pharma. Okay, random pharma.
Yeah.
Big pharma.
Big pharma.
Mhm.
Big pharma or and small?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any startups? Anyone going into startups? That you know,
Yeah, I
forming
have
their own.
startups.
Okay, forming their own companies.
No, just enjoying it, the startup, not creating.
In start. Okay.
Yeah.
What about commercialization and technology transfer? No. Okay.
Yeah, you guys, there's people going in patent specialists, technical specialists.
Okay. And yeah, we'll go into more of those careers. So this graph here shows the salaries for PhDs who are going into careers immediately after graduation. I know it's a little bit small, so I'll just have this red line right here at $100,000. And you can see that most of the careers are above $100,000. And the gray here is employed in industry. So these are the fields that they're in. Above 100,000 is most of the fields in industry. And then the white bar is academics. And academics gets a little bit close to that in certain fields, but it looks like the average salary is about $75,000 for academics. And then postdoc positions is the black, and it's hovering around $50,000 to $60,000. So PhD, right? 3 letters, means a lot of different things, depending who you ask. Because specializations are what a PhD means. It's quite of an old term. It's been around for a long time. So what do people do with MDs? They become doctors. I don't want to be pedantic. Okay, but then what do people do with, so as anyone who becomes a lawyer with a JD, they become a lawyer. But a PhD, you know, sort of open-ended, right? Like it used to be a choose your own adventure book, right? Like, okay, do this, this. Maybe I have this skill set. Oh, I'm an expert in cancer. I'll go into cancer research. I'm an expert in immunology. I'll go into immunology. That is not something that's a bad thing. It gives you a lot of exposure. But the exposure that it gives you can be somewhat overwhelming, I think, to know that you could do so many things. So how do you navigate that? And that's why I wrote the book. But we'll get into it. So this is the same comic. I'd show you the way, but the doors are locked from when I went through it. This is why my book is different than Isaiah Henkel's. Is, you know, if you want to go into academics, you have to have a very strong foundation. The foundation is going to be what really cements your ability to jump off. It's the diving board for which you'll launch your career. And it's very hard to build on a bad foundation. When I interviewed people for my book, I heard stories of really challenging situations. I heard stories that you would wish upon your worst enemy. And then I heard stories of amazing environments. In fact, everyone that said that they had a good PhD said that they really got along with their advisor. And if you think about it, your advisor is your boss, technically. And if we were to translate this to industry, they'd be technically your boss, who you're eventually supposed to work with as a colleague, as a direct colleague. So the foundational component was having a supporting advisor. Now you know, one of my favorite expressions is when you're pointing a finger at somebody, you're pointing a few back at yourself. So okay, so if it's their fault, what about is it my fault? You know, how can I make my situation better? So in the book, there's a PhD diagnostic test. It'll give you a quantitative number that actually tells you how competitive your program is compared to someone else's. So if you have an amazing advisor, amazing project, an amazing environment, you know, it's kind of good to know that. You might be able to reflect back to see yourself. And then if you have a weaker component, you can work on it, and the book suggests ways to make those situations better, so to capitalize. And I think if you're in a startup, and someday you might work in industry, maybe not, but it's always good to know if you're in a company that's about to go through a recession, lose a product, because then you'd be like, oh, I'll go find a new company to work in. I don't want to be a part of this sinking ship. You know, you might want to leave. Or if you're really invested, you might stay and say, how can I make it better? So that's the kind of same situation you're in, right? Like, if you're in a sinking ship, how do you make it better, or should you leave? And if you're not in a sinking ship and you're in a great ship, you know, how do you make sure you take advantage of that and seize the moment? So it's a little bit of both, right? Like, you got to know where you are. And so I think, you know, as you go forward and you launch into your careers and you start to analyze your career, you can't put that on the back burner. You have to make that a part of your PhD journey. You have to make progress towards understanding what you eventually want to do, and you have to explore what's out there. So it's a continuously iterative process, getting to know yourself, getting to know the careers, and then finding that fit between you and what's in the world. So what's here and what's out there, right? It's also the way entrepreneurs work. It's product market fit. You are the product, and you have to fit yourself to the market. So your academic plan. All right, Tom, I just met you. You're only 45 minutes of my life, maybe an hour. I'm going to go back to my lab. I'm going to go back to academics. My advisor's breathing down my neck. I got to get results for the next lab meeting. I'm staying in academics. Okay. If you're staying in academics, you got to improve your situation. And number one, improve your PhD experience. You might have to conduct a postdoc, and you damn well sure have to learn about the academic careers that are available to you. So how do you improve your experience? Well, there's a lot of ways to get your advisors to fall into their favor and get them to like what you're bringing to the table. Of course, it's great if you can get along with them, joke, and have some sort of common denominator. Maybe you're from the same area or something. But of course, you never know who you're working with, right? So you can ask them, hey, are you writing a review paper like in this comic? And the professor says, well, no one's ever asked me if I can write a review paper before, but I would love that, you know? So there are ways to be proactive and get your PhD advisor to sort of respect the fact that you're on their team and that you get academics. You need to publish, you need to get grants. So maybe you can ask them if you can kind of find out what ideas they're thinking about so you can do more research towards that. Or perhaps you can ask them to write a paragraph of a grant that they're writing and see if you can come up with a literature summary for that grant. Or if they're writing a new grant and say, hey, I really want to make sure that you get that grant you're going for, is there any data that I can produce that might really tilt the odds in our favor for getting it? And they'd be like, who is this person? Is this like, you might like reach out and try to see if you're like an AI model or something. But yeah, so you want to meet them halfway. Like, how can you, if their biggest stressors are getting funding and publications, then if you're managing up, how do you make them look good? Because eventually that'll fall back onto you. Okay, so that's a very short summary of what's in the book about being proactive. But then let's just jump into this postdoc idea. So postdoc, right? Like everyone, and who's here? Can you raise your hand if you're a postdoc? 1, 2, 3, cool. So I'm sure at a certain point you considered many different things when going for a postdoc. I'm sure perhaps it was like just your yearning to stay in the field and go for something. But there are many reasons to get a postdoc, and I'm not sure if you've been exposed to this, but I've been exposed to people at NYU who are staying in postdoc year after year without a clear understanding of what they're going to do. That being said, one of the stories in the book is about, he's from Italy, and Antonio, he actually stayed in a postdoc for 10 years and got to become a professor after that. And he got 2 Nature papers, or 1 Cell and 1 Nature paper during his postdoc, and he was a shoo-in for a postdoc. So he was, professor job. And then my friend Anna Weinstock, she's from Israel. She did her PhD there, came here to NYU, and she is now at Chicago as a professor. And she really mastered how to become a professor. She knew about how to make her application into almost like a marketing branded campaign. Like everything was so tight, everything matched up with each other, told a very seamless story. So her story is in the book too. So there's the right reasons for doing a postdoc and the wrong reasons. The right reasons are to define your niche, to learn how to apply for K99, to apply for it, leverage your skills and training. And then the wrong reasons might be to just like kind of to decide what to do next. Because you want to take chances, get out there and just go for it. Not worry about anything. And then of course, and this is what I'm. It's important to know what kind of careers are out there if you're going to stay in becoming a professor. So there's obviously teaching, research and teaching. The bigger R1 universities, which rely on research. And then of course, these are all paid differently. So the funding is more important in research universities because it supplements your salary. And then, so there's different parts of these different careers. And then there's research staff in academics as well. So if you're thinking about transitioning into each of these careers, you might need a postdoc for the research and teaching and research professor jobs. And then in the teaching intensive career, you're going to need teaching experience. And you might not need a postdoc, but you might be applying against people with postdocs. So really try to have that teaching experience to leverage that. All right, so part 3, now we've talked about academics, we talked about the landscape that you're in, and now we're going to talk about the non-academic careers. And opening this door is really up to you. So understanding the careers that are out there is going to be your own fruition. And of course, having an amazing department like you have, you're going to have, seek out some of the materials that they provide, because they're going to be able to provide you with that perspective that you're not going to get from something else. So where are your peers and other graduates working? I think you said you said big pharma, you said other areas, and that it's really important to know where other people are going. That's going to really help you see just what paths have already been carved out for you, and then also like deciding try to find other people who you find their careers interesting to talk to them as well. So I've summarized here where PhDs can work. They can work in government, academics, startups, industry, and finance, and then the careers in which they can go into. So where could you imagine a PhD working in government or nonprofits? FDA. Yeah.
What about
NIH. Yeah.
NSF.
NSF.
There's
So
big
the-
companies for funding.
Yeah, the FDA and NSF and NIH, the DoD, CDC, the World Health Organization as well. These jobs have different titles for PhDs, where some are called program coordinators. It's a very common one. But there's also scientists that work for the Department of Defense. There's engineers, and your PhD is going to help you and propel you forward in your career. So what are some jobs in industry where people work with PhDs? You might have heard different things than me. What do you think? Regulatory affairs, 100%, yep. Patent agents, yeah, absolutely.
What
project managers, product managers too. So publications, what's that?
Medical affairs.
Medical affairs. Commercialization as well, getting the word out there about a product. Learning how to disseminate that information to all of the different customers too. So how do you explain something very complex to, how do you explain how an immuno-oncology drug works to a patient versus a pharmacist or a doctor? But that's advertising and marketing. What about insurance? Any civil engineers in here? Or, okay. So insurance is another one. You can study the effect of, or model the effects of large pandemics and how much they'll cost insurance companies, and then bring that information back to the insurance companies, and they'll decide how much reinsurance they need to get to make sure they don't go bankrupt if a pandemic happens again. Consulting firms is a big one. What about startups and investments? So you can actually get a job as a venture capital company where you are evaluating technologies and deciding where you'd like to fund what startups you'd like to fund. And you do what's called diligence. It's diligence work to decide how much the company's worth, how good the idea is, and they rely on PhDs for that. Finance, equity research is a big one, biotech and pharma equity research. So we're going to summarize the findings from different companies and decide if the bank or venture capital company or investing firm that you're working for should fund that company. So if you want to take a picture of this, you can. It's a little bit of an overview. Yeah?
I feel like us going into just, we think about academics and we think about going industries, more like two groups than all the other big groups that are actually there. And I think one of the factors that cause this is because it's kind of scary looking at even just at this slide and seeing all these opportunities when all I'm doing in my PhD is working on a bench. And I understand we're working on a lot of other things like project management or time management or leadership, whatever, all these things, right? But when you want to go in marketing, do you not want to have some background in marketing? Or do you not want to have some background in how insurance works? Or how public investor works? Like,
yes.
It's kind of scary trying to see yourself in transition in such a different role,
yes,
without no training at all.
So I'll answer your question now and at the end as well. But one of the biggest things in understanding, if you're trying to come up with a new product for entrepreneurship, for example, you have to talk to your customers and leave the room. One of the biggest problems that people starting companies make and why they fail is that they don't know their customer. You can kind of equate that to where you're at now. If you don't leave the bench, you'll never get exposure to what the careers are out there. So you have to get excited. Yeah, like look on LinkedIn and get the free month of premium and message a bunch of people for information interviews. In the book, there is a paragraph about what exactly to say to ensure you get that informational interview. And then there's also every single job title for all of these careers is listed, and then what you do. So you can get an overview of it. Yes?
Also, I mean, I've had iJobs panels on literally all of these except for insurance. So you can also go to the past iJobs events page and like type the keyword in equity research, and it'll populate all of the panels I've had. You can listen to those recordings if you haven't,
But let's say if you're interested, if you're actually interested in going to that
How to
direction.
make
But exactly, but once you make a decision, so that really interests me, but I'm scared because I don't know anything about it.
Then you
So-
should shadow. You
so-
should apply for phase 2 of iJobs.
So just,
shadow.
I don't want to, just for the sake of time, I want to make sure I get through this. I'll hang around as long as possible, as long as needed to talk at the end. But just to keep going, the industry mindset is different than academics, and that's because So your PhD is in the middle, you're the black box. So what goes into the PhD? They give you pay, they give you a lab bench, and they give you kind of some security, mentorship, guidance, and then you're outputting research, funding, grants, and discoveries, and publications. But in industry, they give you a salary, opportunity, mentorship, and management, and then the black box is you as a PhD, and then you're supposed to finish your work, get it done on time, deliver, and be a reliable team member, and hopefully increase the revenue and not be a liability to your team. So it really is down to the dollars in industry. Success metrics are going to be different. You know, in academics, you know, how is a lab judged, right? How do you judge a lab? Papers. Grants. Yeah. Okay, how do you judge a company? Money. Yeah, money. How wealthy are they? Like, how is Apple continuing to innovate? How many of the pros have they sold? They sold 200,000 apparently for $3,600. So the career fit. So going back to this, it's an iterative process, and this is what you're saying. How do I know what to do? But you are the product. Your career is the product. Your career is the part that you're iterating on. So you're going to get to know yourself, you're going to get to know the careers, and you're going to know what you want to do. Maybe it's just going to reaffirm that you want to be a professor. That's important. You've got to explore. And then you're going to ask yourself 3 questions. All of this is, there's worksheets in the book, and you'll say to yourself, what's motivating my next step? Do I want security? Do I want to make a lot of money? Do I want to mentor people? Do I want to be altruistic and have an amazing input into society? Maybe I want to find a cure for, you know, a rare disease. What are the talents that you bring? Every individual in this room has talents that are specific to them. Maybe you're super detail oriented. Maybe your pipetting skills are unbelievable. Maybe you're super extroverted like me. You know, maybe you're comfortable. Some people aren't, you know, some people don't want to do this, but I do. But like, there's some people that are good at marketing. Like, how do you know if you're good at marketing? Some people are really good at listening to people and understanding what they're saying. Maybe you speak a couple languages. You know, all of that stuff is going to make an impact into your career. That can all impact things. So you know who you are is it's important. And then, you know, where do you want to work? Do you want to be at the bench? Do you want to work at home? Do you want to be in a computer, in an office? Consider those things. And then you can gauge, you know, how much importance of each step you'd like to place. So if wealth is your number 1, then you probably want to go into finance, right? If work-life balance is your number 1, then maybe you want to work, you know, for a nonprofit or industry where the culture is a little bit more relaxed. I know you're not gonna be able to see this, but this is in the book. This is there's 5 overviews and then about 10 questions to ask yourself. What this is the book guides you through to do 5 informational interviews, and once you do with different careers, and then you find out 5, like all these things about each of those 5 careers, and then you'll be able to understand perhaps which one of those careers you'd like to do. And then eventually you'll have your job and get your offer. So I'm coming up at the 10 minutes left. I'm going to try to leave enough time for questions and just conversation. But today's PhD is the proactive PhD, because today's PhD is, you know, it's high tide raises all boats, right? You have to help each other. PhDs have to communicate with one another about what they're thinking and doing. There are a lot of careers out there. There's a lot of paths. There's a lot of information. And that is what motivated me to write the book, because I didn't think that there was something that was not something that was bipartisan. I wanted something that didn't have, you know, a slant on it. But yeah, so helping each other. But the proactive PhD is one where you are having a plan, and to not have a plan comes at a very high cost. It means that if you wait until the last minute and have a frantic job search, you might wind up in something undesired. You might wind up unemployed. You might wind up unsure of what to do. But having a plan and working at it along the way of your PhD or postdoc is going to lead you to having maybe a bridge job. Like, oh yeah, if I go into a data science boot camp right at the end of my PhD or postdoc, I'll be able to become a data scientist. Or if I do it at night during my postdoc, in 6 months, I'll be able to apply for jobs as a data scientist and talk about my projects. Just an example. But these little proactive steps that you're going to uncover are going to let you have a way more proactive experience that lets you really grab the bull by the horns. And that, I wrote the PhD planner is, the intent of it is that it's a daily and weekly planner that has the guidance through your job search in it in order to use it every year and make progress. So this is the 2023, 2024. But the idea is that it would help you be proactive towards 2 sets of goals, both academics and then exploring your career. And then finally, I think, one thing that I've found in my career, so I've had the very good fortune to meet amazing mentors and people who were incredibly encouraging for navigating this path as a PhD. And I think that a lot of people are willing to pay for every PhD that I've ever really interviewed or talked to on the phone wanted to help and was willing to tell me about their story of how they got to where they are. So you're in great company because we're all willing to help each other, which is pretty awesome. It's not like lawyers who might be like, oh, they're going to take my market share, or how are we competing against them someday? So it's not like that. We all kind of get that as an academic, we've all been through something together. It's like, oh man, we've all had those same experiences, and that makes it really special. So one of those services that's available is the Future PI Slack channel. A lot of people share their applications with each other on this Slack channel, and it's something where if you're going for academics, you're going to want to join this so that you can see what people are doing as they prepare for the job market. And I know Rutgers, you all unionized, so definitely take advantage of these things because I'm sure there's a lot more opportunity coming through those channels and through this department as well. I have my service, little shameless, PhDsource.com. STEM Peers is another one. They put on events in New York City, but they have a lot of resources out there. So that's the end of my talk. That's what I have to say about the academics and where the PhD is at today. And yeah, any questions?
One career I didn't see that we should talk about is also working in public policy. I mean, it's kind of nonprofit, but like working for the government. So there's a 1-year fellowship that you can do at any stage post PhD. So you can be a postdoc, you can be just graduating, you can be a faculty member and work in